Awesome. So hi again, for those of you who are tuning into the recording, my name's Tom. I'm a senior college counselor and content specialist here at College SA Guy. And my background before coming to CEG, as we affectionately call it, is in highly selective college admissions and college counseling. So I have both read thousands of recommendation letters from teachers and counselors in my time in admissions, and I also used to write counselor letters as a counselor in an independent school in Seattle called Lakeside School. So this is something that I have eat, slept, and breathed for a long time. And I actually have presented on this topic several times at NACAC, which is the National Association for College Admission Counseling. It's a big conference that we go to at College SAI every year to stay informed with what's happening in the industry, the profession, and how we can best equip you as students, families, counselors embarking on this process with high quality vetted information that's timely and relevant to your needs. So we're glad you're here. And I'm also glad that I'm joined with Jay, my wonderful co-host. So Jay, why don't you let the folks know a little bit more about you?
Yeah. So prior to joining CEG, I worked as a high school counselor before, and I also read as an admissions reader for the UCs. So I didn't get to actually read letters of recommendation because the UCs don't require it. But as a school counselor, I've also been in the position of helping write the letters of recommendation. Mhm.
Awesome. I'm glad we got so many sides of the coin. So just some housekeeping items for you all. Session is being recorded, so before you ask, there is your answer. And so if you need to step out or head out or anything, you will get a recording to this, as well as any of the resources and links and things that we share during the session in the chat. Um, if you need captions, you should be able to see them through Zoom's automatic caption feature if you want to use those. And then you will notice we have the chat, which is more kind of like vibes where you're tuning in from. But we also have a Q&A box, which is where we'd love for you to direct your questions that you have for Jay and myself. And since we're going to be flopping back and forth, flip-flopping back and forth in terms of presenting the content, we'll try to keep an eye on your questions throughout the session. So you don't need to like hold them till the end. But we will also try to keep some time at the end for questions too. So keep them coming. That's why we're here, is to support you with what you have questions around. And there's no such thing as a dumb question. I really do believe that. Um, just so you know, this is something that I like to just plug and share at the beginning of any public webinars that we do like this. We put together a calendar of events on our webinars and live events page, and we keep it pretty consistently updated. And a great way to kind of have that be like ready to go on your calendar is actually you can download a Google Calendar or an iCalendar plugin, and it'll basically populate all the sessions onto your calendar already. You will need to register for them individually, but it kind of like at least gives you a sense of like, hey, rather than registering every single time via email, you can have it all in one-stop shop. So this is what we're getting into today. We're going to spend a little bit of time actually in the beginning, before we even get into like the pragmatics of asking teachers and actually getting the rec letter to come to life. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of college admissions officers and how they view and evaluate rec letters. That's something that I think is really good before you dive into like, hey, what is this thing that's being added to my candidacy that I'm not really writing myself? It's good for you to know how they're being evaluated in the grand scheme of your total application, right? In addition and alongside your transcript, your school profile, your essays, your activities, because this is a layer in a very layered sheet cake of an application that you're sending in. And then, as you can see from the screen here, we're going to get into some tips around putting together a great brag sheet with specific quality anecdotes that you can send to your teacher or counselor to have those be present in your candidacy. You're not actually writing it yourself, but you're really assisting whoever is writing that letter with lots of good quality, juicy content that will be valuable to folks on the other side of the desk who are reading the letter in admissions. And then just some good do's and don'ts about like thanking recommenders, being kind of like going about this in the best way, best practices. And again, any questions you have, it could be about rec letters. It could just be about general areas of the college process. Both Jay and myself, we counsel students on all areas of the college process, activities, essays, testing questions. So really, even if it's a little bit off topic, feel free to pick our brains since that's what we're here for. Okay, so starting off with some data, my favorite. So this is as I mentioned, I actually mentioned NACAC a little bit earlier. It's this big professional organization that includes both counselors who work in high schools as well as admission officers, admission professionals. So it represents, thousands of different schools and colleges. And one of the biggest things that they do in terms of reports and data for all of us who, are part of it is they do this survey semi-annually where they send out to all these different colleges, hey, let us know what the most important parts of your application process are, how when you're making decisions on candidates. And so each year about 180 or so different colleges respond, and it's a pretty good smattering of different sizes and locations and selectivity. But what you see is that the counselor recommendation and the teacher recommendation are just basically above class rank and extracurriculars and demonstrated interests as the most important part of your candidacy. Above this is going to be your essays and your academics, your actual grades and courses. So recommendation letters are not the end all be all, right, of your application, right? The most important thing by far is doing well academically and keeping that momentum up and choosing the right classes, taking advantage of what you have available to you as a student in your high school. But definitely, these can really be a really valuable part of your application, especially if you give them the proper time and attention and equip your teachers and counselors with the right stuff, right? You're all coming from different high schools, right? On this call. Some of you are coming from Ghana, some are coming from Chicago, some are coming from Washington State, and you don't all go to the same high school with the same course offerings. You don't all necessarily have the same access to your counselor or your teacher, right? So that's another thing that people in college admissions, just like they evaluate your transcript and your academics through your individual local context, they do the same with your letters of recommendation. Jay's going to talk about this in a second, but one thing that I really wanted to note is there's this article that we've been kind of talking about a lot as a team at College Essay Guide called the $0 College Counselor by by Higher Ed Insights. It was just released last week. And it's a really interesting article because it goes into kind of how it has a bunch of testimonials and quotes, mostly anonymized, from different admission officers at selective colleges. And they're kind of speaking and commenting on how their admission process and reading process has changed in the past year or two, given the rise of things like AI influencing application materials. And of course, we want to be on record to say that it is better to be safe than sorry when it comes to responsible and ethical use of AI tools in this process. Using it as a research assistant, using it to pick their, AI's brain about questions, list building. Those are all things that would be green flags in the admission process. That's wisely using a tool that's available to you. But of course, there has been a rise of students who are using it for actually producing essay work that is not originally their own. And given that, there are several admission officers in different colleges who have commented that they have started to actually use counselor and teacher recommendations to kind of corroborate essentially things that are being shared in student materials. So you want to make sure that your story aligns both what you're communicating about what your skills, qualities, values, and interests, how they're going to impact your future college campus, your future goals. And you want to make sure that that is aligned with the story that's being communicated from your teachers and your counselors, especially in this era now more than ever before, where it's a little ambiguous as to how every single college, we showed the data on the previous screen from 2023, but things are rapidly changing every single cycle. And given kind of testimonials like this that you're seeing here in this quote, it is a good idea to try to have each part of your application be as strong as it can. And some you have more autonomy over, others you don't. But at the end of the session, you'll definitely have a lot more clarity about how you can be a part of your rec letter writing process, both as not just as the asker, but also as an assistant, essentially, to the authors.
All right. I want to start off by thinking about these letters of recommendation from the lens of an admission officer. So when an admission officer is looking through your application, they don't actually know who you are. So the letters are a great way to kind of figure that out from you guys. And I've heard from multiple admission officers that a lot of the times they actually like to start off with the letters of recommendation because it sets up the context of who the student is. It gives them an idea of the types of school that they come from, and then also the communities that they're from as well. It gives them an idea about the curriculums that they take, whether, their school offers many, many different AP classes, or maybe they come from a school that only offers one or two AP classes. They also can figure out things like the average SAT from the school and other various different information. The admission officers are also looking for superlatives. They want to see these exceptional qualities from the students. They want to hear about, this is an amazing student and how it's one of the best students that, they've seen in the last 5 or 6 years. Qualities like that, that's what excites the admission officers. They also want to hear about memorable details in the classrooms or in the school setting. I've heard about a story from an admission officer that said they read a letter of recommendation from a teacher that said the student was such a joy that every day they bring a smile to the classroom. Or a student comes to class and tells a joke every single day, and that really lightens up the mood of the classroom. It's stories like that that the admission officer is going to remember you by. And then finally, a lot of students come and ask, how do the colleges actually know that I actually did these activities and that I didn't make these things up? Well, through the letters of recommendation from the teachers and the counselors, they can verify that yes, the student, did a charity event and raised this amount of money, or that the student was a strong leader because through the letters of recommendation, these are the qualities that they're seeing over and over again from their teachers and the counselors. So some things that the admission officers are not doing, they're not comparing different letters from different high schools and going, wow, this letter is super descriptive and this letter is not as descriptive, so this school is, not as good, or the letters of recommendation from this school is not as good. They're not doing that. They're reviewing letters from each high school within that context. They're also not judging the writing of the counselor or the teacher. Every year, I'll work with students and they'll come to me and say, I really like this teacher, or I have a really great relationship with this teacher, but I'm just not sure if they're the best writer. And that's not important. If the writer makes grammatical errors or they're just not the best writer, the colleges are not going to care about that. It's the content about what they write about that they truly care. And then finally, the colleges are not punishing students for having inadequate letters. They know that sometimes when students go to a very large high school, like some of the California schools, a counselor's caseload could be 1 to 300 or 400. And in those cases, these counselors are not going to know every single student at a very personal level. So they're not going to penalize these students because the letters that they are reading are a bit more general, or more reads more like a template, because they understand that sometimes these students are coming from really large high schools where they can't get that personalized attention. All right. Tom mentioned a little bit about the importance of these letters of recommendation, and there are several factors that's kind of leading to this. The first is the test optional movement, where a lot of colleges right now are allowing students to choose to send a test score or not send a test score. So for students who don't send a test score, there's this big piece of an admission data that's missing from their profile now. So the admission officers will have to figure that out through the other parts of their application. And the letters of recommendation is one of these areas. So just for an example, if a student decides not to submit a test score, so this their critical reading and their math section is now missing, but they can use the rest of the application to kind of figure it out through their English and math grades. And potentially, if they get a letter of recommendation from an English teacher or math teacher that says how great of a student they are and how they, understand all the material, that will allow the admission officers to kind of, be not use the test scores and not be as worried about that. So again, this is kind of where the letters of recommendation can kind of confirm other areas of the application. Another part is for students applying for selective colleges. When students are applying to these highly selective colleges like the Ivy League schools or top 30 schools, a lot of the students have really strong GPAs, they have really strong test scores, they have your typical activities like leadership and clubs. So they want to know beyond that, what is the student like? And the letters of recommendation are a great area for the admission officers to kind of differentiate students from each other, and really tell who the strong students are, or who the really active students are, or the students that they really want to admit into their campus. As mentioned before, high school context is another area that is really important when evaluating these letters. They want to know what the environment the student comes from and what kind of community they come from. They want to know a little bit more about the academics that's offered at these schools. So again, high school context is super important. And similar to that is a recent SCOTUS decision where colleges are not allowed to talk about or ask about things like gender, class, and race. But if that's brought up in a teacher recommendation letter or their counselor recommendation letter, the colleges will evaluate that and take that into consideration. So that is a powerful tool for students to kind of see, like, can I have my counselors or teachers talk about these really, really important experiences that I've had that did make an impact in my educational career.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as someone who used to write these letters many times, right, there's many students that I worked with who, I used to work at a private high school where the students of color were not as numerous compared to the vast majority of the student body. And so many of the students would talk to me and discuss and have had in questionnaires discussions of kind of sometimes feeling more isolated or just some of the challenges that they had in wrestling with that. And then also students celebrated points of pride with me around their culture and their heritage and where they come from. And maybe they're involved in cultural clubs and opportunities, or they decided to write, their capstone history paper on Black diaspora, which relates to their own personal identity and journey and family. So there's lots of times where our personal lived experiences come up and show up in our personal lives and how what we're involved in as people in our school communities, but also in our academic journeys as well sometimes too, depending on the class that you're taking and the assignments that you've been a part of, and maybe ones that you've opted into and chosen the topic based on a personal topic of interest, and maybe that topic of interest has something to do with yourself and where you come from and things like that. So just want to let you know that is a green light currently in the landscape. I know there's a lot of information swirling about things like DEI and how colleges are navigating that in this current political climate and landscape. But the Supreme Court decision still stands, and there is not that has not been something that has been taken out of the way that colleges can review files, is the written stories and specifics that are included in the file are things that can be still folded into a student's candidacy in the admissions committee. So speaking of things that are sent to colleges, we're talking a lot about rec letters, right? But it's important to know that your rec letters are being sent along as a trio. They're being sent along for most private colleges, I would say. Jay's going to get to a slide a little bit later that you all tuning in may have different college lists. And for example, as Jay mentioned, the University of California schools don't even accept recommendation letters as part of their process. It's not something that they require of students, or even if you were to send it in sneakily, they wouldn't look at it. But the majority of colleges, especially ones that are more selective, do ask for some combination of a teacher and a counselor letter. They also will ask your school counseling office to send in a document called a school profile. And if you're taking anything away from this session, it's that if you haven't looked at your school's profile or seen a copy of it or asked your counselor for it, you should do that after the session is over. It is a really, really valuable tool to admission officers that is read alongside your transcript and your letters to get a better sense for the school community that you're coming from, right? That this is the primary way that admission officers gather that information. For example, what percent of students go on to four-year colleges here? Is there a really strong college-going culture? What are the different types? Maybe the profile might have information about the types of clubs and organizations that are available. It might have information about the GPA scale that your school uses, how many students are achieving a 4.0, or maybe you go to school with a 7.0 scale. So then the admission officer knows what strong academic performance looks like for your local environment. It also usually kind of give a rundown of the area, where the school is located. Is it in a post-industrial city that's having a decline, or is it in a place that's kind of having an influx of immigrant workers, and that's really changing the landscape, right? A lot of times these documents outline where this individual place, the diversity of the student. So it's really good to know what's being communicated about your school community, because then that way it informs what you can maybe share both to teachers and counselors, but also writing in your own an essay about, maybe how your journey may have been different than the default norm that's being shared out about your school in this document, or the classes that you chose to take, or maybe there was a teacher who taught a certain subject like AP Bio, but they were out the year that you were there, but it's still in the profile. Like, there's lots of reasons why it's good to know what's being communicated in this profile, but it is one of the primary ways that admission officers get a sense for, hey, is this student coming from an under-resourced school where the counselor wouldn't be able to write this glowing, detailed, specific letter in theory because they are working and trying to support hundreds of students. I worked at a high school where I had less than 30 students. No, I had 38 students. Never mind. I had 38 students on my caseload. So I didn't, of course, know every single detail about each and every student, but I definitely knew a lot more than counselors who are coming from some of these other environments. So another good way to kind of think about the difference between teacher letters and counselors is that the counselor letter often, especially think about this when you're filling out your brag sheet or whatever your school is asking you to complete, help your teachers or counselor write the letter. Usually most schools will ask students to complete some type of assignment. You all might are coming from different high schools, so that may not be the case. We have a brag sheet and a rec letter guide that we're going to share with you after the session is over to give you something to work off of. But the counselor letter is really usually kind of giving more of that broader picture of who you are. And you can think about it kind of like the house lights, in a theater versus the spotlight. The spotlight is kind of more of a teacher letter, spotlighting you in the classroom, in action, in an academic setting, in a learning environment. What type of person, what types of roles and identities do you occupy in that space? But the counselor letter is giving a broader picture about like your, maybe you've included and shared details about your family. Maybe you've included details about challenges in your high school journey, whether that was an illness or a death in the family or whatever it may be. Maybe you have, had learning differences that you came late to in high school. And so maybe you've talked with your counselor about that and you've, gone on an IEP and they can speak to that. There's so many different things that, maybe being communicated in this letter. And it's usually things that you have shared with this counselor, this individual, both in meetings and in things like these brag sheets or written communications or forms that they've asked you to fill out. And then again, the teacher letter is less about you being great at biology or you being great at chemistry. And it's more about who you are as a learner. They want to kind of know more about like, okay, is Tom like the firecracker in class who's always like bringing in like controversial opinions and like really sparking electric discussions? Or is Jay, the deep philosophical soul who is really trying to reel back from intense discussions and have people ground and, reorient their thinking, right? Those are the types of anecdotes that describe how you would fit in a learning community that college admission officers are generally interested in seeing. It's not just Tom gets all A's and he shows up on time to class. Those are not going to be as valuable because A, the transcript is there that communicates that information, and B, like you would hope that you are showing up to class, right? So it's more anecdotal ideally. And again, you're not necessarily going to know every single teacher all that well. But Jay's going to give you some advice about which ones to maybe think about asking. In terms of qualities that are valuable to think about communicating with your recommenders, one that we've talked a lot about at College Essay Guide the past few cycles is this concept of admission nutrients. So these admission nutrients are 5 qualities or attributes that we feel at College Essay Guide are really worth thinking about and orienting your college application process around. They're not, it's not saying like, oh, these are the only things that colleges care about, but myself, Ethan Sawyer, aka the College Essay Guy, a few other members of our team, we did a real deep dive on hundreds of different mission statements and strategic plans and admission websites to get a sense for what are the positive character attributes that colleges want to see in incoming students. Yes, they want students who can perform well academically. They want you to succeed. They don't want you dropping out. They don't want you flunking out, right? So they're definitely prioritizing academic admissibility first, but then beyond that, what are the qualitative pieces of who you are that they want to see reflected on in their campus community? Some individual colleges are really different with, how, what their core values are, for example. Like I worked at the Claremont colleges, right? And so, Pitzer College was all about sustainability and social justice and civic engagement. And that's a big part of their history from the 1960s, the anti-Vietnam movement. And then Claremont McKenna College, right down the street, I worked at Pomona, but there's 5 schools that are all right next to each other. And they all had slightly different histories and visions and values. Claremont McKenna College was all about like learning by doing and leaders. And it was it was founded during the 1940s for veterans coming back from World War II to use their GI Bill credit. So there was a lot of kind of an emphasis on learning styles and learning in action, because that was what many of these veterans were used to and during their time in the service. All that to say, every college is going to have a distinct mission, vision, and values, but these are 5 qualities that are pretty universal. Like these are 5 qualities that you're going to be hard pressed to find a college that would be like, we don't care about collaboration, or like, we don't want students who are intellectually curious, right? These are all things that are really, no matter the individual different mission statements or cultures of a school, that maybe you can reflect more in your supplemental essays if a school requires those. Because these letters are being sent to like all the colleges on your list, they're not being customized from college to college to college. These are good qualities to think about sharing anecdotes around with your teacher and counselor to include. Another exercise that we have been really kind of like folding into our practice and work as counselors and essay coaches at College Essay Guy is called roles and identities. So roles and identities is essentially a long list. If you've ever done the values exercise at College Essay Guy, it's really similar to that, where essentially there's a long list of all these different roles and identities, such as big picture thinker or catalyst, or and it's up to interpretation, as to why you chose those words or identities and how you see them living out in your life, right? How for example, if I'm a catalyst, is it a catalyst to work towards certain values of social change that I really care about? Or I'm a catalyst in my family because I'm really trying to like bring us all together through family dinner night that I plan, whatever it may be, right? These exercises that we put together are kind of meant to help you think about what are the distinct roles and identities that you occupy, and how can I communicate those to my teachers and counselors as really distinctive elements that make me who I am, rather than just I'm a student, I'm an athlete, I'm a smart kid, right? You're applying with lots of students and athletes and smart kids, but the idea of this exercise is to really help zero in what type of athlete are you? What type of student are you? To really kind of give more of that specificity that admission officers are really craving in this sea of sameness. So there's an example here, right? Like, one of the roles and identities on the list is mess maker. And you might be like, I can't believe someone would say that they're going to be a mess maker for college. Like, it's a very serious place. I want to show you actually an example of what this might look like actually in a recommendation letter, and how an anecdote about you being a mess maker and what that means to you might translate to an actual letter. So this is a very common, or like this is, I guess, like the type of prose and the way that a teacher or a counselor might be describing a student in a letter right here. So Allie describes herself as a mess maker, but when she says this, she's not talking about the state of her chaotic locker, which is somewhat of a legend among her peers. She's more of a structured mess maker, intentionally making messes in our school community that align with her values and disrupt existing norms. For instance, her initiative to implement meatless Mondays at our cafeteria was executed because of a proposal that would have rivaled any environmental lobbyist. She cited facts, figures, and even cost-saving benefits that made the moral argument all the more compelling. So this is gold, right? This is the type of specificity and zeroing in on a role and identity that you occupy, that if you can channel some of these, when you're filling out a brag sheet or a form that your school is asking you to do, don't just write like one sentence answer, because if you put in more effort and investment with details like this, citing your Meatless Monday initiative or whatever the equivalent is in your orbit and world, that's going to help that reader in admissions by reading the teacher letters and counselor letters that have these anecdotes and examples of your roles and identities, of your admission nutrients like intellectual curiosity or collaboration or service to others. It's going to give that admission officer much more material to make a case for you with their colleagues in an admissions committee setting. This is just another sample that I want to read through pretty quickly, because I think it shows how like superlative examples and specifics can really help drive these letters home. And this is actually a real letter from when I worked at Pomona that I saved and screenshotted because a couple of schools asked me to do presentations about like, what's a good letter? And I was like, well, this is one of them. Grace has requested a letter of recommendation, and I'm pleased to honor that request. Where do I begin? I met Grace over the years and heard about her through other teachers, but it was not until the end of the summer that I truly had a sense of who this young woman actually was. I was driving home from a work while listening to an interview on Oregon Public Broadcasting when I realized that the student eloquently defending her stance on equity in the classroom was none other than Grace. She lives up to every expectation I had in her. She's confident, outspoken, resilient, and in the face of people who challenge her social and political views, and empathetic. Right off the bat, right, we're having lots of different descriptors of who Grace is, and they're tied to a specific anecdote, an example that this teacher coincidentally actually heard on the way to work or wherever they were driving in the car. With 16 years in the classroom, I would place Grace at the top 1% of students who I've had the privilege of teaching. She has a natural curiosity about how she can be an integral part of promoting social justice. From the chalkboard project to student council, Grace manages to balance a seemingly impossible workload with maturity and ease. When she approached me about wanting to have more insight into judicial prejudice, I suggested reading Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. This is above and beyond anything required in our AP psychology curriculum. She simply wanted to understand how uneven the judicial playing field truly is. Again, we're having some comparisons here, right? Where this teacher is qualifying, I've taught for this many years, and this is where this student is kind of showing up for me in my career. Not every single letter is going to have and be, this is one example. Teachers and counselors have lots of different ways that they write letters, lots of different writing styles. Again, you're coming from lots of different schools, and this is an example of, I'd say, a more detailed letter from a teacher that was really able to get to know a student very personally. But I just wanted to highlight it as a really high superlative kind of in the spectrum of letters that's out there to give you some best practices to think about. Gee, in my classes, what are some areas where I've maybe gone above and beyond what's been expected of the syllabus? Have I proposed that we go and talk about certain topics? Or have I done outside reading on the topic outside of what's been asked for class? Let your teacher know that if they don't already, right? Because they're going to be able to channel that in their letter to show that intellectual curiosity in action. When you read through Grace's application, you will see accolades and volunteer work, much like thousands of other applications you receive from prospective students. Grace stands out in that she truly is not just doing this work as a resume filler. Her heart and mind are committed to understanding the world and her role in it. The challenge for Grace will be narrowing down what she will study when she arrives on campus. Whichever path she chooses, she will disrupt the status quo and have an impact on those around her as she dedicates her life to service for others. And then the end is kind of just a strong sign off. And as you can see, it's from class of 2018. So it truly is back from my days at Pomona. But I would say, even if this letter was written in 2026, this would be a real exemplar letter that an admission officer would land on and be like, hey, I have a lot of material right now to make a case for this student and why they belong at my college or university, given these values that they're really exuding from their application. And they don't all have to be the same as Grace, right? I'm not saying you all need to be super into social justice or you all need to be reading, extra material outside of class per se. But what you do want to do is equip them with specifics that illustrate the type of student that you really are.
Yeah, so now that we've heard some amazing letters of recommendation, how do we get one of these? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to do some research first. First, think about the colleges that you're applying to, and then look at the requirements from these colleges. Some schools require one letter of recommendation. Some school requires two. Some, like Dartmouth, ask for peer recommendation letters. So having an idea of what all your school requires will give you a better idea of how many letters of recommendation you actually need to get. The next thing that you want to do is you want to complete a questionnaire. Sometimes some schools call them brag sheets or cheat sheets that the counselors will provide for you as a form to fill out. Or, if your teacher doesn't have one, you can easily find one online and fill one out yourself. These are questions about you for them to use in the letters. So you're basically supplying them with what they could potentially write about. So even though you might not be able to see what these letters ultimately end up saying about you, you can at least give the teachers and counselors ammunition for how they can write these letters. So you want to be thinking about, your qualities. You want to be thinking about the emission nutrients and the roles and identity that Tom was talking about earlier. And you want to be thinking about like what examples, what adjectives should I be letting the teachers know about. And then another strategy that you might want to consider is since you might be asking multiple different teachers, you might want to give them different adjectives or descriptions or stories to tell them so that your letters of recommendation are telling different parts and different pieces about you, and they're not merely just repeating the same thing over and over again, how you're a great student, how you're a hardworking student, in three different forms. You might want to have them talk about different things. Okay. The next thing is to think about how to pick the right teachers. This is just a general rule of thumb. It's not like a hard rule that you must do these XYZ things, but generally speaking, you want to ask your a letter of recommendation from one of your core teachers. So this could be an English teacher, a math teacher, a social science teacher, or a foreign language teacher. You want to make sure it's one of your core subjects, and then also from junior year. We recommend junior year because these are teachers that you've just had. You're fresh in their mind. They just taught the classes that you're part of, and generally speaking, your junior classes are going to be a bit more rigorous too, so they can talk about you in those type of context and setting. However, if you don't really have a teacher from junior year that you're close with, it's okay to ask a teacher from previous years, like in 10th and ninth grade. However, you just want to make sure that these are teachers that still remember you, even though you're a great student from ninth grade. By the time you're asking them for letters of recommendation for your college application, it could be 2 whole years already. And even though you might vividly remember these teachers teach, hundreds of students potentially in a year. So 2 years later down the line, they might not be, you might not be as memorable to them anymore. And then finally, if you don't have a core subject teacher, you could ask any teacher from any grade level. If you have, a really, really a PE teachers that you really, really like, it's okay to ask them. But I would say that's more of a third choice rather than a first choice. Hopefully, you have somebody from your junior year that you can ask. Another point that I wanted to make is a lot of students, overly stress the importance of needing one STEM teacher and one humanities teacher. And although that's a general rule of thumb that we do recommend, if you have two STEM teachers that you have great relationship with that you can ask, it's fine to use two STEM teachers. Or if you have two humanities, that's fine as well. The only thing that I ask you to do is double check the requirements from the school that you're applying. If one of your school does require a STEM teacher and a humanities teacher, then you do need one from each. Okay. Great. So some of you might be thinking like, oh my gosh, I don't really have great relationship with my teachers yet. What can I do? Well, if you're junior, you still have a little bit of time. It's March right now. Most of you end your year in May or June, so there's still about 2 more months to build that relationship. A couple things you could do. You could go to their office hours to ask them questions about the material, to show that you're excited about the learning and that you have additional questions to what was discussed in the classroom. You can go in before or after class to again do the same thing where you could talk to them, ask them some questions, and show that you're engaged in the classroom setting. And then on top of that, sometimes teachers open up their classrooms during lunchtime that you can go in, hang out, and talk to them. This is where there were some questions about like, oh, how much outside of the classroom should this teacher know about me? And in these kind of outside contexts where you're hanging out with them and having these discussions, that's kind of where they can kind of know you outside of just who you are in the classroom. So sometimes you might want to talk about things about your family or your culture, or maybe sometimes you're letting them know about things that you do during the weekend or for fun. That's kind of where these sometimes can sometimes come in play. Okay. And
All
then,
right.
oh, you want to go?
Oh, if you're going, go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was gonna say now that you're ready to ask for a letter of recommendation, the first step is for most students, they'll send them an email just letting them know like, hey, I'm thinking about applying for college, and are you willing to write me a letter of recommendation? We can set up a time to talk about this in a little bit more detail. Then once you've set up a time, you want to make sure that it's not, right during the middle of class. as I mentioned earlier, you can go in before class, after class, during breaks, or sometimes even during lunch hours to set this appointment up. When you're having this meeting, you want to have that conversation with them, letting them know what types of schools you're thinking about, the general deadlines of these schools. Oftentimes, they're going to ask you for a list, and whether they're going to ask them about these early deadlines or regular deadlines that you may have, so they know when to submit it by. And then they might again have you fill out that brag sheet or cheat sheet that they want you to answer specific questions. If they don't ask any, you can provide them your own, or you can give them a resume that you have so they know your outside activities as well. And then finally, you want to follow them up with an email, just letting them know, thanking them for willing to write you a letter of recommendation, and then also letting them know if they have any other specific questions to let you know what they might want.
So, I mean, this is really kind of like a sample dialogue, essentially, to have the conversation. I know sometimes it can be like kind of intimidating. I remember back when I was in high school, I was super nervous to ask my teachers, even though I was like a good student and I was asking teachers who knew me well. Um, but just know that, this is very common for teachers who work in a high school, especially those who are coming from sophomore, junior, senior year, right? And so they are used to, helping support and advocate for students through these letters. And I think what they appreciate most is a sense of gratitude, right? For making the time and effort, especially there are some teachers who they get really nailed, by students. I remember this was actually kind of like an issue in the school that I worked at, where we had, everyone was like, "Oh, I've heard you have to have a letter from junior year," right? When, as Jay explained, that is not a requirement. It is oftentimes more recent and can kind of show you as in the current software update of yourself. But I've read amazing letters from students from sophomore year, even sometimes earlier, a little more rare because you're just a little more far removed and you're kind of just like this new, for me at least, like gangly kid who was adjusting from middle school. Um, so oftentimes these later teachers can really, speak to the more fully realized version of yourself that would be most relevant to that college campus. Um, but yeah, just kind of really communicating clearly the request, communicating clearly, when you need it by. The schools, that you're applying to, they are not necessarily going to, they're not going to be customizing the letter for different schools, but just informing them a little bit about your process and your goals is really going to kind of help them have a more, comprehensive sense of what the ask is. And then just ensuring that you'll follow up with an email, right? You don't want this to be the only conversation that you have with them. It doesn't have to be a scripted thing. It can be very natural, very organic, but definitely really supported and bolstered by that tone of gratitude and understanding, and really letting teachers know expectations and giving them a real heads up on this as well. So, speaking of a heads up, um, it's important to listen to your school, your individual high school's policy around this. Some of you may be coming from high schools that are like, we've already sent in our request for teachers. Our school counseling office is making us do that. Others, they may be more fluid or loose, or they are not really, giving you as much guidance. Our guidance is usually to ask, ideally, if you can ask your teachers before the end of your junior year. That gives them the summer to be able to work on potentially some of these letters and putting them together. It is really common for teachers to actually do, even though they're off duty, to be doing work on things like this. So that way, this is not something that they're really trying to wrestle and juggle with their other duties as teachers. They're really busy. My mom's a teacher, so I know a lot about the schedule and how packed it can be. So really, though, say if you have a last minute addition to your college list that requires a letter and you were initially only planning on applying to the UCs, that happens, right? So ideally, you want to make sure to give, 3 or so weeks in advance to that teacher to be able to put together a letter. You don't really necessarily, ideally, or not like coming to someone the week before and asking for something, because that's really going to be a rush job for the teacher, not probably going to be the best letter. So putting together your college list earlier than later and just knowing whether or not you will need letters at all and how many you'll need. Bank on two teacher and one counselor, especially if you're applying to mostly selective colleges. But again, you always want to check the requirements and finalize them. Um, so the follow-up email in this, you're going to want to just, again, as I mentioned before, continue to express that gratitude. You'll want to attach whatever questionnaire. Sometimes the teacher may have asked you to complete one, that they have that they really like, a certain format or whatever. But if not, we have the one at College Essay Guy. There's lots of different ones that you can find. You can even, sometimes something that I actually recommend is at College Essay Guy, we have all of our brainstorming exercises. We have so many of them, right? Essence objects and 21 details and values. You could even send a copy of that to your recommender, right? Because they might not know, all these things about you. And to be able to have this more comprehensive picture and have some, nuggets and anecdotes and things of work that you're already completing for your own essay work, it doesn't hurt to share that document with them. It's who's to say like how extensively they'll utilize it. But more information is usually better than none. A resume is also a good idea if you have one put together. There are some colleges like UT Austin, for example, that even have students complete an extended resume as part of their like strongly recommended admission process. It's a good idea to have some type of resume in general, just outlining, your a summary of your academics. A lot of times it's your extracurriculars or your work experience that's on there, and some bullets of like quantifiable achievements, like we increased our reach in our tutoring program by 200% by getting more volunteers through this initiative that I led with aplomb. Um, and then you'll also want to give them the counselor the teacher a list of the colleges and deadlines that you're applying to, just to make sure that they have that ready to go and they can get them in on time. A lot of times they send them in through the Common App, but you might be coming from a high school where the teachers send the letters to the college council office and they send them along. That was actually the system that my school used. So follow your school's instructions pretty thoroughly with this. But this is just general good best practice. So this is kind of just also, we think it's a good idea to show gratitude, not just through your words, but if you are able to spare some of your allowance or something. Maybe you are a crafter and it doesn't have to necessarily be a monetary gift, but it never hurts to just show a little form of recognition through a card, through maybe a gift card to Starbucks or a favorite local coffee shop or something that you may know about the individual teacher. It's not you bribing them. It's purely showing gratitude. And Jay, I think these are maybe the last two slides for you before we wrap up, and then we'll share a little bit more about college counseling support.
Yeah. So when you're filling out for the common application, as you're selecting your recommenders, there's this question that's going to pop up that says, "Do you want to waive your rights, your FERPA rights?" So what FERPA is it's a law. It stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And what that allows you to do is you're able to view all your documents pertaining to your education. So things like your transcript, your files in your high school, you're able to view all of that. So when you're filling out the common application, they're going to ask you this question pertaining to your letters of recommendation, which is, do you want to see it? And the reason why you might want to think about waiving your rights is because this will allow your teachers to write more freely without feeling like you're looking over their shoulders. And it also allows the admission officers to know that you weren't able to read these letters. So whatever the teachers wrote, it's like their opinion about you. It's, you didn't influence it in any way. You didn't delete out the letters that wrote bad things about you. So it's a bit more objective in that sense when you didn't have the ability to review it. There are also some schools that won't allow teachers or counselors to write the letter of recommendation unless you waive that right. So double check that requirement at your school. But ultimately, the decision is up to you. If you feel more comfortable being able to review all your documents and letters, then go ahead and don't waive your rights. But if you're okay with your teachers being able to write these more freely and having that, objective kind of view, then go ahead and waive it. And that's just the general recommendation is to waive your FERPA rights. And then for some key takeaways, just to summarize everything again, make sure you start early. Don't forget that these teachers are writing letters for other students as well. So if you wait too late, sometimes the teachers can say like, "Hey, I already have 30 recommendation letters I have to write. I simply just don't have time anymore." So as we mentioned before, end of junior year before you go off to summer break is a great time to kind of get that unofficial confirmation. And then when school starts again in the fall, that's when you can submit them your cheat sheets and brag sheets and resumes and everything else. As you talked about, you want to choose your teachers wisely. You want to pick teachers that can write positively about you and that they could write about different qualities that you might have. And then when you are completing these forms or cheat sheets or brag sheets, make sure you provide as much detail as possible. Don't just give them the adjectives, give them the example that demonstrates the adjective that you want them to show. Cool. Think you're muted, Tom.
Thank you. Closing lots of tabs and slides and all the things. Thank you so much, Jay, and thanks for those of you tuning in. We have a few more minutes for questions, but we also wanted to show you may have as you were listening to this presentation, maybe you have like a lot of individual questions about your own school environment and context, and it may be about your recommendation letters, it may be about other things. We can help a little bit right now, but I wanted to just share a little bit about how our college counseling program works at CEG. Um, or just how we support students and families in general outside of uh, college counseling. So if you're not familiar, I'm imagining you are because you're here at this webinar, but College Essay Guy, we're known for, I'd say three, different forms, primary forms of support. The first being for your resources. So sessions like this, we try to do them on pretty much most of the buckets in the college admissions landscape. If you go on our YouTube channel, we have all of our recorded webinars on there too. So if you want to take a look at those, we try to really cover the gamut when it comes to the college process. We have a lot of content about essays. Go figure, since the name is College Essay Guy, and that's kind of was the impetus of the company. But we've really grown a lot. Cue the little cue the little plants at the top of the slide, to be a much more comprehensive area of support for students, parents, counselors, leading sessions at conferences, doing a lot of different things, podcasts, YouTube videos, a very robust Instagram account that I have been managing the past couple of weeks. So smash that like button. Lots of good memes. We're all about the memes. And we also do courses. So coming up, if you're a student, we do courses. I'm actually leading a course on highly selective admissions in April. There'll be information about that sent out via email. We do courses on essay writing each year. So there's lots of different options for that. There's summer courses, there's fall courses where Ethan, the college essay guy, leads these. And they're smaller sessions usually than these webinars. And you usually get a little more personal attention. There's opportunities to get your work, receive live feedback. We can't do it for every single student, but it's definitely, more personalized attention than what we're able to do in webinars like this, right? And then the last end of the spectrum of our support is our individualized one-on-one program. So we have both one-on-one essay coaching, which is exclusively, you're like, hey, these are lists of colleges I'm applying to. I would like support putting the best applications that I can for these colleges. That is one, program that is kind of something that College Essay Guy has been known for a long time. And then we have this comprehensive college counseling program where both Jay and myself, Morgan, Renee, Tilly, Scott, we have a team of college counselors who have all worked a spectrum of different experiences. Some have worked in public schools their whole life, private schools, admissions, and we come together as a team to really kind of have all of these different lenses and perspectives on this process. And you work individually with someone on helping, with your extracurricular interests. How can you cultivate those admission nutrients that we talked about? How can you, put together a great standardized testing plan if you want to submit test scores or not? And you'll get guidance around that based on your own school and environment. And you're getting that kind of guidance from someone who knows this process, who stays up to date. We can, guide on early decision, early action strategy, demonstrated interest, which is something that's really important to a lot of schools, right? How have you done visits there? Have you done virtual tours? We can give you guidance on where to prioritize, your demonstrated interest. Lots of things that come along with this, helping you identify best fit colleges, not just here's all the top, whatever schools that you want to apply to, but what are schools that you can, be admitted to and still find the things that you're excited about from maybe the highly rejected schools, but how can we round out that list, right, with schools that you're really excited about too, have what you're looking for, but you also have a more higher chance of being admitted to based on your profile and what that college is looking for. So it is really customized. It's really a lot of what you want out of it. But if you wouldn't mind sharing the info about college counseling in the chat, you can set up a call with our program advising team and they can walk you through a little bit more about what it entails and if it might be a good fit for your situation. I also want to make sure to plug our Match Letters College program. So I saw that on the previous slide. So if you are hearing this and thinking like, hey, haven't even done the call, but I'm kind of not too optimistic that I can afford a service like that. If you are coming from a background, an environment that is cost sensitive, if you do identify as a low income student, you're Pell eligible, you receive free and reduced lunch, the Match Letters College program might be a really great fit for you. And we're a 1-for-1 company, meaning that every student that we support with individualized paid services, essay coaching and college counseling, we take on a Match Later student and they receive 10 hours of free college counseling from volunteer counselors. So it's an awesome program. It's one of the reasons why I really love working at College Essay Guy is that commitment to equity and making sure that, support is going to look different for each and every one of you. We just want you to leave feeling like we are in your corner, however it makes sense for your situation, your capacity, finances, everything. So speaking of which, any more questions, things that have come in our last few minutes here?
I think there's some questions about like how do you know if your teacher's going to write you a good letter? And I think one, general thing is if you ask them and they sound excited, I think that's a general good sign. You have to remember that these teachers and counselors are spending time outside of their working hours to write you these letters. So if they're willing to do that, they're probably going to write you a good one.
Yeah. I would also say there was a question about like, should I ask them how I'm doing in the class? And based on their response, that's how good the letter is going to be. My hot take, and maybe this isn't that much of a hot take, but the letter really isn't like, as someone who used to read them, part of my job, I wouldn't be going to the letters to be like, how good at physics are you? Like, that's not really the question that I'm asking. Sometimes I didn't even remember what the teacher's subject was. Because the anecdotes that speak to who you are in the classroom are more valuable to the admission officer because it's not really the letter's not as much of a check of how good you are at the subject because usually your grades and your courses kind of speak to that aptitude as well as maybe some of your interests outside of school through your resume. So there really isn't as much of that coming up. Sometimes, of course, some teachers will be like, I've worked with students so many years and their mathematical abilities are off the charts and I have a hard time challenging them. Right. That's, for sure a great example of intellectual curiosity. But remember all those other admission nutrients I shared before, things like collaboration, right? Can you give examples of times that you've really worked together, maybe with peers that it wasn't really all that easy to work with, but you came together on a group project and it really synthesized a lot of your interests and goals. You're able to delegate really effectively, whatever it may be. You're the peacemaker of the group. So it's those I'd say are the types of details where if a teacher is, if you look at report cards or maybe some assignments that you've received from a teacher, that can sometimes give you a little bit of a sense of like the way that they speak to you as a learner and your work.
Right. And even if you get like a B in a class, you can still ask them for letters of recommendation.
Someone's asking, does it have to be a current teacher? Nope. It can be from previous teachers. In fact, most of the letters are from your junior year teachers, maybe 10th grade teachers, sometimes senior year. But I'd say you want to prioritize getting the request out there earlier than your senior year fall because they're not really going to be able to know you as much. Someone's asking, is a letter from an institutional music director? I've been involved with the program for 4 years, a good idea. It depends on if the colleges you're applying to allow for outside recommendations. Some colleges are really strict and are like, hey, you can send them in, but we're not going to review them. We are capping our reading capacity at this many documents. Admission officers do read through files very quickly. So you really want to follow the college's instructions based on how many outside recommendation letters are they welcome to see. I would say that in general, for most, at least selective colleges, music wouldn't really be seen as a core solid academic subject. You really want to prioritize English, math, social studies, a science or a language course primarily. I've had students though who've asked for business teachers, they've asked for music teachers, especially maybe if you're interested in pursuing music, right, as a major, or you're applying to a conservatory or something, that's a different story, right? But if it's not your primary academic interest, generally other subject areas are probably going to be a little better. Um,
There is a question about if the teacher doesn't currently work at the school. It's okay. You can still ask them for letters of recommendation. Because when you do make that request on the Common App later, you just need their email address. So as long as they have agreed to it and it has given you their current email address, you should still be fine.
yes, I saw that question. Great. Awesome. Well, it is officially 5:02 in my little corner of the world. So we'll wrap up here, but thank you all for tuning in. We hope you left with some concrete knowledge. And again, you'll receive the follow-up resources via email about things that we talked about in the session. So that way you have all the good takeaways. And we'll hopefully see you on the next one. Thank you so much, Jay and Ray, for being on this journey with me.
Thanks. See y'all.